The flight landed 40 minutes early. I remember thinking that was a good sign. I had been gone for 3 weeks, and the last thing I wanted was more delay between me and my own front door. I had a reservation at Beatrice's favorite restaurant booked for that evening. The kind of place where they know your name when you walk in and bring the bread before you ask. I had been planning it since my second week away, texting the maitre d' from a hotel room in Houston to make sure they still had the corner table available. I was in a good mood. That is the part that stays with me. I was genuinely, completely, in a good mood. I decided not to text her that I landed. I wanted to surprise her. She was supposed to be picking me up at arrivals, which meant she was already somewhere in the terminal or pulling into the parking structure. I grabbed my carry-on from the overhead bin, put on my jacket, and walked out into Terminal C thinking about the look on her face when she saw me coming through the doors early. I heard her laugh before I saw her. Beatrice has a particular laugh she uses with Priscilla Van that she does not use with anyone else. It is looser than her normal laugh, less managed. The laugh of a woman who is not performing anything for anyone, who has her guard completely down because she is with the one person in her life she believes she does not have to be careful around. I heard that laugh, and I smiled to myself, and I turned toward the sound. They were seated at a row of chairs near the rideshare pickup information board, maybe 40 feet ahead of me and slightly to the left. Beatrice had her carry-on between her feet and her phone face down on her thigh. Priscilla had a coffee cup in one hand and was leaning toward Beatrice with the specific posture of a woman in the middle of saying something that only the two of them are supposed to know. I was about to call out to her. I did not call out to her. I do not know exactly what stopped me in that first second. Some part of my brain registered something in their posture before the rest of me caught up. Priscilla's back was angled toward the foot traffic, not away from it. Beatrice's eyes were moving in small sweeps of the space around them, the way eyes move when a person is making sure they are not being overheard. I stepped behind a structural pillar. Not dramatically, just one step to the left, and I was out of their sight line. I stood there with my carry-on bag in my hand and my jacket folded over my arm, and I listened. Priscilla said, "He doesn't know about the transfers yet?" The word transfers went into my chest like something cold and narrow. Beatrice said, "Garvis barely looks at the statements. He trusts me with the accounts because he thinks I'm just the organized one." I stood completely still. Beatrice said it the way you say something you have said before. Not confessing. Not nervous. Reporting a fact she had already made peace with. The way you describe the weather in a city you know well. Priscilla laughed and said, "Girl, you have had that man so comfortable he doesn't even know which direction to look." Beatrice said, "That's what happens when you build something with somebody. They stop checking behind you." My hand was on the strap of my carry-on bag, and I became aware that I was holding it very tightly. I made myself loosen my grip. I made myself breathe at a normal rate. I stood behind that pillar, and I did the thing I have always done when a negotiation stops going the way I expected it to go. I got quiet. I got still. I started listening for information instead of reacting to feeling. Priscilla said, "And Terrence? He's good with the timeline." Beatrice said, "Terrence has been good with the timeline since January. Garvis is the last person to figure out what's already done." January. I ran the months backward in my head standing behind that pillar. It was late September. January to September was 9 months. 9 months of something I did not have a name for yet. 9 months of a timeline I was not supposed to know existed. 9 months of my wife sitting across from me at dinner and sleeping beside me in our bed and kissing me goodbye at the door with a plan already running underneath all of it. Priscilla lowered her voice, and I had to hold myself very still to catch it. She said, "What about the Westfield account? Is that one clean?" Beatrice said, "It's registered under your consulting name. Nothing connects back to us directly. By the time anybody thinks to look, there won't be anything to find." I felt something shift in my chest. Not break. Shift. The way the ground shifts in a very small earthquake, where nothing falls but everything that was standing suddenly feels like it is only standing provisionally. I knew about Priscilla's consulting firm. Beatrice had mentioned it months ago, casually, the way she mentioned many things, telling me Priscilla was trying to build something for herself and she was helping her get set up. I had nodded and said that was good. I had not asked follow-up questions because I trusted the woman telling me. I stood behind that pillar and I understood that the way I trusted Beatrice, the specific texture of it, the way it made me not check, not question, not look twice at the account statements she managed, had been studied, had been used, had been part of the plan. She had not just betrayed me. She had used the best version of who I was against me. Priscilla said, "What are you going to do when he finds out?" Beatrice was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "By the time he finds out, the divorce will already be filed, the assets will already be structured the way we need them, and Terrence's project will already be too far along to unwind. There won't be anything to find out. There'll just be what exists." Priscilla said, "You're cold, B." Beatrice laughed again. That same loose, unguarded laugh. She said, "I'm practical." I stood behind that pillar for another 90 seconds after they stopped talking. I watched them gather their things. I watched Beatrice pick up her phone, check the arrivals board, and type something that I felt vibrate in my own jacket pocket 3 seconds later. I looked down at the screen. Almost there. My flight just landed. Can't wait to see you. I put the phone back in my pocket without responding. I waited until they had moved toward the arrivals exit. Then I turned and walked back through the terminal in the opposite direction. I called a car service from a number I knew would not show up on our shared phone plan. I sat in the back of that car for 40 minutes, and I looked out the window at the highway, and I did not feel what I expected to feel. I did not feel rage. I did not feel the kind of pain that makes a man call his wife and say, "What did you do?" What I felt was the arrival of a decision. Clean and certain and very, very quiet. By the time her key turned in our front door lock that evening, and she found me in the kitchen making coffee with a smile on my face, I had already made every foundational choice about what came next. She hugged me and said she missed me, and I held her and said I missed her too. And every word of that was the first move in something she did not have a name for yet. Welcome to Mason's Storyvault. If you just felt your stomach drop, good, because this story is only getting started. Subscribe right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss what we drop next. This one is going to go places you are not prepared for. I need you to understand what Beatrice Opal Greer was to me before she became the woman I heard in that terminal. Because the revenge I am about to walk you through will not make full sense unless you feel the weight of what was there before it was gone. We met at her cousin Clemmy's cookout in the summer of 2014. Beatrice was standing at the far end of a folding table in a yellow dress, arguing with her uncle about property tax assessments on inherited homes in this city, holding a plate of potato salad she never ate, completely unbothered by the fact that she was the loudest and the most precise person at a table full of loud, precise people. I fell in love with her before she knew I was standing there. We built Stanton Property Solutions together at my mother's dining room table. I handled acquisitions and financing. She handled staging, client relations, and the paperwork infrastructure that kept us clean and legitimate when we were too small to survive the mistakes that routinely kill small businesses before they find their footing. We signed our first commercial contract on the same day we signed our marriage license. For 3 years, those two documents felt like they were made of the same material, the same intention, the same future. By year 5, we had 12 employees, a portfolio of 31 properties, and a reputation in this city built from both of our names and both of our labor. Beatrice's name was on everything because it deserved to be. I never questioned that. I never wanted to. I want you to hold that before I keep going. I have a contact named Aldrich Pins who does forensic accounting for law firms across this city. We played ball together in college. I called him from my car, parked 3 blocks from our house, on the Tuesday morning after I came home from the airport. I told him I needed a full audit of our business accounts going back 18 months. I told him he would find things that had been moved without my authorization. I told him I needed to know the exact amount, the exact routing, and the exact credentials used to authorize each transfer. He called me back in 5 days. The number was $340,000. 14 separate transfers across 9 months. Each one sized carefully below the threshold that triggers automatic review flags. Every one routed through a business consulting firm registered in Priscilla Van's married name that had never produced a single invoice, a single deliverable, or a single documented hour of work for our company. And every transfer had been authorized using Beatrice's administrative credentials on our account management portal. I sat across from Aldrich's desk and looked at the printout and did not speak for a full minute. Aldrich said, "Garvis, you know what this is?" I said, "I know exactly what this is." He said, "You want me to refer you to?" I said, "Not yet." I needed Beatrice calm. I needed her certain. I needed her to keep believing that Garvis barely looks at the statements. Because the moment she understood that her window had closed, she would move the money further and deeper, and I would spend the next 4 years in civil litigation, chasing something I should never have had to chase. So I went home that evening, and I made dinner, and I asked her about her week, and I listened to everything she said, and I noted everything she did not say, and I stored all of it. I was no longer the husband in that house. I was something else now, something patient and very, very focused. It took my private investigator, a man named Sivian Colt who I trust with things I do not put in writing, 3 weeks to get me a full picture of Terence Boudreau, 41 years old, originally from Baton Rouge. Self-described real estate developer who had been operating in this city for approximately 18 months, which placed his arrival here at almost exactly the same time Beatrice began her January timeline. 2 prior civil judgments against him in Louisiana for breach of contract. 1 dismissed fraud complaint in Georgia. A man who had learned precisely how close to the edge he could operate without going over it. He was also renting office space in the same building as 3 of our direct competitors in commercial property management, which meant he had been in rooms with people who knew my name and my company for over a year. I attended the same industry networking events Terence frequented for 2 weeks. I did not approach him. I let him see me in rooms. I let my name do its own work, because Garvis Stanton means something in this city that took a decade of early mornings and hard decisions to build. By the 3rd event, he came to me. He put out his hand and said, "Terence Boudreau, I've been hoping to get in a room with you." I shook it. I smiled exactly the right amount. I said, "That right? What can I do for you?" He wanted to discuss a joint venture on a mixed-use development in the warehouse district. He was smooth about it. Prepared. He had done real homework on me, which told me he was not careless, which told me I needed to be more precise than I had originally planned. I told him I was open to a conversation. I told him to send over his financials and his development plan, and I would take a look. He sent everything over in 48 hours. Inside those documents was the complete architecture of what he and Beatrice had been building with my money for 9 months. The warehouse district development required a municipal zoning variance. That process had been moving forward quietly for 4 months, which meant Terence had been working this city's approval system since approximately the same month the transfers began. I know 3 members of the city's zoning review board. I have contributed to 2 of their campaigns. I called Councilwoman Idella Frazier and I asked her to lunch, and over that lunch I told her, precisely and without drama, that I had come across documentation suggesting the applicant on the current variance request had outstanding civil judgments in 2 other states that had not been disclosed in his application materials as required. Idella is a thorough woman. She thanked me and told me she would look into it. The variance review was placed on administrative hold pending supplemental disclosure the following week. Terrence did not know I was behind it. He began making calls to everyone he knew who had any proximity to City Hall, burning through relationships he was going to need later, generating exactly the kind of visible anxiety that makes other people in a room start quietly reassessing their involvement. Meanwhile, my attorney, Navia Threadgill, who has handled my business matters for 6 years and who is among the most precise legal minds I have ever worked with, was building the civil case document by document. When I laid everything Aldrich had found on her desk, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Garvis, this is criminal exposure. For Beatrice and for Priscilla both. You understand that?" I said, "I know." She said, "Do you want a file?" I said, "Not yet. I need one more thing in place first." She looked at me for a moment and said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough." Corliss Hadley had been our office manager for 4 years before Beatrice pushed to have her position eliminated, citing budget restructuring, in the spring of that year. I had gone along with it. I want to be honest about that. Beatrice presented the numbers, I reviewed them, and I agreed. I did not ask enough questions about why that particular position, why that particular person. Corliss reached out to me 6 weeks into my investigation through a message to my direct business email, not the shared company address. She said she had been trying to decide for months whether to contact me. She said there was something she heard in the office in March that she could not stop thinking about. I met her at a coffee shop on a Thursday morning. She told me she had been in the supply room adjacent to Beatrice's office when Beatrice took a call she clearly believed was private. Corliss heard enough to understand that the conversation was about account transfers and about someone named Terrence and about a timeline. She said, "Mr. Stanton, I didn't want to be wrong. I kept hoping I misunderstood what I heard. But when she had my position cut 2 weeks after that call, I stopped thinking I misunderstood." I looked at her across that table, and I thought about the fact that I had signed off on eliminating her position. I thought about what that cost her while Beatrice was protecting a plan. I said, "I'm sorry about your job, Corliss." She said, "I want to help you." I told her what I needed. I told her when I would need it. Sivian mentioned his cousin Presley one afternoon while we were going over logistics. Presley had been through something adjacent 3 years earlier. A business partner had moved funds through a third party and left Presley holding tax liability on money he never touched. Presley had fought it the way I was fighting this. He had won. Full civil recovery, the partner's professional license revoked, complete documented vindication. Sivian said, "Presley got everything back." I said, "Good." Sivian said, "He also told me winning felt like closing a drawer that was already empty. He said he doesn't sleep a full night." 2 years later. I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. Then I said, "I appreciate you telling me that." I meant it. I filed it somewhere honest inside myself, and I did not let it change the direction I was moving. But I stopped pretending I did not know what Sivian was showing me about the road I was on. A person who will not look at what they are becoming while they are becoming it does not get to be surprised by who they find waiting for them at the end. I was not going to be that person. I was choosing this with my eyes open, and I needed that to be a real choice, not a blind one. Our annual investor dinner was the Wednesday evening in November that I had been building toward since the morning I called Aldrich. 44 guests. A private dining room on the 14th floor of a building downtown. Every year Beatrice ran this event. This year I told her I wanted to handle it. I told her she deserved a year where she was not carrying the logistics. I told her I loved her and I wanted to take something off her plate. She smiled and said, "You sure? You hate event planning." I said, "I'll figure it out." Among the guests I added to the list that Beatrice had not reviewed, Terrence Boudreau's largest Louisiana creditor, who had been attempting to locate him for a renegotiated payment arrangement. 2 reporters, one from the City Business Journal and one from a regional investigative outlet, that covers financial misconduct and property development. And Corliss Hadley, whose name I watched Beatrice register from across the room the moment she saw the place card at table 6. I saw the fraction of a shift in Beatrice's face. She covered it in under 2 seconds. She was good at covering things. I knew that better than anyone. My remarks were the last item before dinner was served. I stood at the front of that room, and I thanked everyone who had believed in this company. I thanked Navia, who was at table 4, and gave me one small nod when I said her name. I thanked Corliss, and I did not look at Beatrice when I said it, but I felt the temperature in the room change slightly. Then I said, "Before we eat, I want to share something with this room that every person here deserves to know, because every person here has put something real into what we built." Aldrich stood and walked through the audit findings with the precision of a man who has testified before and knows that calm delivery lands harder than dramatic delivery. Numbers, dates, account references, 14 transfers, 9 months, $340,000. The name of the recipient firm, its registration, the credentials used to authorize each movement of funds. I watched Beatrice's face go through 5 distinct things in the space of 4 seconds. I did not look away from her through any of them. I needed her to feel the specific weight of being fully seen by someone who has been watching everything for months while you believed you were invisible. Terence Boudreau stood up and said, "This is completely inappropriate." Sivian, who was standing near the door, said, "Sir, you are welcome to leave." He left. The 2 reporters were already making notes. If this story is hitting different right now, like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit subscribe and the bell so you are there for every story we tell. She found me 40 minutes later in the hallway outside the dining room. Beatrice stood in front of me in the burgundy dress she had worn to every one of these dinners for 3 years, and she said, "You could have talked to me." I said, "I'm listening now." She said, "That is not what I mean, and you know it." Her voice was low and her jaw was set. "You didn't have to do it like this." I said, "You did what you did for 9 months, Beatrice. I had 6 weeks. I used them." She tried denial first. It lasted about 30 seconds because the documentation was in Navia's briefcase and both of us knew it. Then she said it was complicated, that Terence had come to her with something real, and she had been trying to protect both of us from a decision she was afraid I would not make. Then she said I was never home, that I did not understand the pressure of managing everything while I traveled, that she had been invisible inside the company she helped build. Then she cried, and the crying was real. That is something I will not pretend about. The crying was completely real. I stood there, and I let it reach me, and I did not move toward her. Then she said the thing neither of us expected her to say. She said, "I needed to know I could exist without you. Not without your money. Without you needing me to hold everything together all the time so that you could move freely." I couldn't breathe, Garvis. I have not been able to breathe in 3 years, and I didn't know how to tell you that without it sounding like I was asking you to be a different person. The corridor was very quiet for a moment. I said, "You could have told me." She said, "Would you have heard it?" I stood there with that question, and I did not answer it. The honest answer was that I did not know. The dishonest answer was not something I was willing to offer her in that corridor or anywhere else. What she did was still wrong. The money was real. The plan was real. Terence was real. 9 months was real. None of what she said in that corridor undid any of those facts. But it removed some of the clean certainty I had been carrying, and I had been carrying it for 6 weeks like a tool I needed in both hands. And standing in that corridor, I felt it shift into something more complicated that I was going to have to live with after the legal process finished and the silence arrived. I said, "Navia will be in touch." I walked back into the dining room while she was still standing there. I did not look back. I did not need a final word. I needed to be finished. Those are different things, and I understood the difference. The civil filing went in the following week. Full recovery of transferred funds plus interest plus legal costs, pursued against Priscilla's consulting firm with Nevia's full attention. The criminal referral to the DA's office was a separate process that, once the documentation was in official hands, moved according to its own timeline and its own authority. The zoning variance on Terrence's warehouse district project was formally denied 6 weeks later based on the undisclosed judgment findings. His Louisiana creditor made contact. 2 investors who had been at our dinner withdrew from the project within the month. Terrence Boudreau left this city before the new year without a public announcement. Priscilla called me from a number I did not recognize. She left a voicemail saying she never meant for it to go this far and that she loved me like family. I deleted it without saving it. The divorce filing had already been signed before the dinner. I had signed the retainer the same morning. I helped Beatrice choose a restaurant for her mother's birthday lunch and told her to tell her mother I sent my love. I want to be precise about what that cost me. Not in money. In myself. In the specific texture of who I was during those 6 weeks, the controlled distance I maintained, the warmth I performed, the love I referenced while building the architecture of what I was going to do to her. I was not a man I fully recognized during that period. I was effective. I was necessary. I was also someone I am going to have to account for in my own reckoning separately from the legal one. Stanton Property Solutions survived. Our investors stayed. Our reputation held because I had carried the truth into that room myself before the room could construct its own version of the story. The company survived. What I am still working out is the cost of the method I used to save it. 3 days after the dinner, I was leaving the parking structure downtown, and a woman ahead of me dropped a folder, and every page inside it scattered across the concrete floor. She stood there for a second with her hands out and her eyes wide. I put my bag down, and I helped her pick up every page. She said, "Thank you. My whole morning is in there." I said, "I know how that feels." She smiled and gathered everything back together and walked toward the elevator. She did not look back. I stood in that parking structure for a moment, and I noticed I was not thinking about Beatrice. I was not thinking about Terrence, or the civil filing, or the variance denial, or any of it. I was just a man who had helped a stranger pick up her morning off a concrete floor. It was the first moment in 6 weeks where I was not inside the architecture of what I was building toward. It was the first moment I was just a person again, standing in an ordinary place, having done an ordinary decent thing. I did not know yet whether I was going to be able to hold on to that. But I noticed it, and I decided that noticing it was worth something. I did not do what I did to destroy Beatrice. I did it to prove to myself that what was built in my mother's dining room, at that table, with those documents, with those years, with both of our names on everything, could not be taken from me quietly, and that who I am is not something that disappears when someone decides they would rather I did not exist. The people who betray you are almost never strangers. They are the ones who knew exactly where you kept your trust and chose to treat it as an opportunity. What you discover when you stop bleeding and start thinking is that the most important thing they took was never the money or the years or the position. It was the version of yourself that believed that being good to someone was enough to make them good to you in return. You do not get that version back. But if you are honest about what you are trading to win, and what winning actually costs, and who you are becoming in the process of becoming someone they could not defeat, what you build in its place is something that no one who underestimated you will ever again have the standing to touch. That story deserved your full attention, and you gave it. Now give it to someone else. Share this with one person who has ever trusted the wrong person with too much. Subscribe to Mason's Storyvault so you are here every time we drop something that stays with you. Like this video, and tell us in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between confronting someone immediately and waiting until the moment was exactly right? What did you choose? We read every single comment. The real betrayal is never what they did. It is the moment you realize how long they were doing it while you were still calling them yours.